All right, kia ora koutou. Thank you for joining us. My name is Thomas McGrath. I'll be the host of the Q&A this afternoon from wherever you are. Welcome. I'm joining you from Wellington, and my compadre Simon is joining us from Auckland. I'm going to introduce Simon in a moment, but I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what this Q&A is all about. So this live Q&A is produced by Write Online, which is our very own library of microlearning videos and resources. So our expert consultants like Simon and sometimes myself have made a wonderful collection of videos at a bite size so that you can learn about all things plain language, communication, thinking tools, lots of different things in there. And you can access them whenever you like. So great resource, and we're offering a free 7-day trial if you'd like to give it a go. You can check it out on our website at write.co.nz. So today we are here for a Q&A, and the topic is more than words. No, Simon and I are not going to be doing any singing. You don't have to worry about that. But we are going to be looking at the things that go into a document that aren't just the words that we write. So we're going to be focusing on layout and design of documents. And we've got some cool things to show you about really practical tips that you can use when you're putting together your documents. So the person with the answers today is Simon Carter, one of our very own training consultants at Write. Simon, lovely to have you along. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you, Thomas. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Now, for the folks who are joining us, could you give us a very quick insight into a little bit of your background?
Sure, absolutely. So my first career was as a graphic designer. So as a youngster, I was very interested in writing and journalism. But when I got to what was then a polytechnic in the UK, then I realized that journalism was going to be a massively long, hard slog. So I dropped out and very luckily fell into working in design. And then I worked as a graphic designer for about 20 years and did lots of work on kind of detailed documents, everything from annual reports to templates for what can only be described as investment bankers. So, and actually ended up getting back into writing through doing a lot of work on a very detailed kind of what I would call decision-related documents. So I've worked both sides of the street, kind of trying to make things clear through design and trying to make things clear through writing and editing and structuring of messages.
Fantastic. Okay, you're the guy for us then today, Simon. We've got some questions for you. And I just want to remind people at home, this is a live event and you can contribute your own questions if you have them for Simon. I've got plenty of my own to ask him. I've got lots of things I want to find out. Down the bottom of the bar here, you'll see that there's a Q&A function. Just click that little button and you'll be able to enter a question in. And we're going for a power half hour today. So hopefully we can squeeze in as many of your questions as possible. So the first thing that I want to ask you, Simon, is how do you define plain language just as an approach to our communication?
I think it's all the different skills and techniques that you'd use to make your information as easy to absorb as possible. So it's making sure that you're putting the content that people want first comes first. So the most important stuff arrives first. But you're also, when you come to the actual kind of reading and processing of the information, it's visually, it's easy to absorb as well. So you can see the headings, you can find the things that you need through signposting and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And why is that so important? It sounds, it's a lot of care and effort that goes into designing an effective document, and it might sound like an obvious question, but what are the main benefits as you see them?
Well, I think the way I think of it is that let's assume is that we work very hard to try and get our thinking straight and try and get our writing well thought through, but then if we then put it into a format that makes it hard to absorb, then we've kind of broken that good thing we were trying to build, really. So it's really about taking a good thing and making sure that it's offered to the reader in a way that's going to help the reader. Otherwise, it's a bit like cooking a delicious meal and then serving it in a rusty bucket that's a bit muddy, It's
charming, but not very healthy. Okay. Well, now I'm interested in a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk through is quite visual. So I know that you've got a little thing to show us that will guide us through some of the key steps. And I will, like a good cooking show host, throw little tidbits of questions at you as we go. So lead us through some of that, your version of changing a document, and we'll see how we go from there.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
So what I wanted to do is to step through the kind a set of changes that help to make a kind of raw document easier to work with for a reader. It helps you as a writer get your messages to pop off the page. And there are kind of two aspects to this. One is that I've tried to illustrate the very common things that we see in documents that perhaps haven't had all the love and attention that they should have had. And we're also going to use a framework that we use at Write, that we recommend to people, that we've developed based on the work of a well-known designer. So what I'd like to do is to kind of step you through this story and show you some step-by-step changes. And if Thomas will field your questions and pass them to me. So we see this as a story of a document. So it's starting with a little snippet. Mary and Bob constantly carped about their layout and formatting until they discovered CARPT. So this is our little acronym for clear layout. And on Write's website, we have under the resources tab, we have a checklist for document layout. And the acronym is CARPT, and based on the idea of contrast, alignment, repetition, proximity, and density. And so I'll be able to illustrate some of these ideas as I go through, step through the kind of transformation of a base document.
Lovely. Now I'll just jump in there and say that these are refined from the Non-Designer's Design book written by Robin Williams, which is a really good read. And they're great principles to be able to put into action. So let's go.
Great, thank you. So the first where I'd like to start then is with I've created a mock-up of a hypothetical document from a hypothetical council. So I'm going to zoom in on a couple of elements of this just to illustrate the kind of things that we see a lot of. So first of all, we've got quite a cluttered sort of top header and footer of the document. So if we zoom in on that header, we find that there's a great big logo, and we very often see documents where the organization is slapping a big heavy logo on the top of every single page, kind of eating up the real estate that you as a writer can use. So we've got the big heavy logo, and at the foot of the page, just to kind of add something else into our soup, as it were, we've got this slightly clunky footer. So the first thing that I would do looking at a document is to think about what I call clearing the furniture. So that header and footer I see is kind of being the furniture. So the first thing I do is to move that. I'll get to that in a minute, but I want to illustrate the other problems that we have here, or kind of failing. So the first thing is we've got the headings that we have, like you see there, number 1, background to the master plan, and in blue writing below, the third arrow, what is a master plan? Those headings are floating midway between paragraphs. So our advice is that we want proximity. So we want our heading to cling to the text that it belongs to. And I'll show you how this change will work in a moment. So, and the other thing so we've got the 2 floating headings, and we also have justified text. Our advice would be that justified text is harder to read because of the uneven word spaces, and there's research that supports this. So the first change is
sorry, Simon, I'll just jump in there. Is there a time where you would use justified text? Some industry.
Personally, I'd kind of prefer not to. If it's
the other difficulty is those rivers of white, aren't they, that show through the document.
Exactly. So when we have justified text, we have these kind of rivers of uneven of white spaces. So the first thing that I do is range the text left. And can you see that these headings are no longer floating? So the bold headings are closer to the text that's below them. There's more space above than below. So, and also we've ranged the text left. So we've stopped the headings from floating away. So that's our proximity piece. And we've left aligned the text. So the next thing that I'd look at is how to kind of clear up that clumsy furniture at the head and foot of the page. So what I'd do then is to remove that top level logo and to free up space for a clearer top level headline and make it clearer what the levels of headlines are. So at heading number 1, that's one style, and below that, we've got a further level of sort of hierarchy. So up at the top, we've now got a kind of top level heading. We've lost that heavy furniture at the top of the page, and you'll see that we've got more of a visible hierarchy.
Where's our lovely logo, Simon?
Sometimes you just have to let things go. That can still be on the cover. So we can still have branding on the cover, but we don't need to have that on every single page. An old colleague of mine used to say that if you need to put your logo on every single page, you've kind of lost the argument, because if people can't remember who you are. So the next thing that you might consider doing, so now I'd hope you'd agree, we've got a kind of a crisper looking document. So we've tidied up that header, we've got a clear top level headline, and we've added these headings in that have clear hierarchy. You may also notice that all of our headings are now what we would call statement headings. Mm-hmm. So in the earlier versions, some of these headings were question headings. What is a master plan? And we've now moved on to statement headings.
So can you talk just briefly, Simon, about why statement headings are so powerful, not necessarily in the words that you write, but what is the intention behind a statement heading, and why do we use them?
Well, really the idea is that you're giving the reader a kind of a headline that tells them that the key idea, then you're going to add in the detail behind that idea as you move through the document. So you're giving people a main thought, then detail behind the thought. And our brains just find that easier to process. If you give someone the main idea and then the detail behind it, it's a more persuasive way to talk to people. And as a reader, we find it easier to absorb.
Mm-hmm. And just the last question on that, is there a guidance on length? Like, can you put too much information into a statement heading?
Possibly. I mean, my advice when I'm training is always start long with the complete thought and then trim out some words. Mm-hmm. Usually we would say that when you get into the text, you don't want you try and avoid a 2-line heading if you can. Mm-hmm. So mostly try and keep it to a single line. Mm-hmm. So then the next thought I wanted to show you is the idea that you can start to add in bits of kind of visual interest. So there are 2 quick thoughts here. One is that you can just drop a panel here, and you'll notice as well, something I haven't pointed out, sorry, I apologize, is that as I've made these tweaks, I've made the text measure a bit narrower. So actually, we've got a bit of breathing space on the right. This would always be my advice. Don't use the full width of the page. The more lines, the more words you have on a line, the harder it is for the reader to keep their place. If you've ever been reading something and stumbled and had to go back, it's very often because you have a very long line width or measure, as we used to call it in the old days.
There's also a lot to be said for leaving lots of white space on the page, which that does. It leaves a lot more breathing space for the text.
Personally, this is entirely personal. I think it also helps you look more confident. So you haven't had to kind of shovel every single thing in with the kitchen sink, back to cooking again. You've actually let it breathe a tiny bit. So moving on, so we've got a slightly narrower measure, and as we have that narrower measure, it gives us a bit of space to use that right-hand edge of the page to, for example, put in highlight panels. So here we have a highlight panel that might cover one aspect of the topic, and I have another example here, which is an idea that there's a famous ex-Stanford professor called Edward Tufte, who would call this a single number highlight. So you use a single number to draw the eye, and then you explain the detail behind that. And later on, we'll send you a link to some of Edward Tufte's books. He's a terrific, he's put together terrific books on how to explain things clearly, visually. So the next thing I wanted to flag is the idea of perhaps using tables or other visual elements. So a table can work well as a visual element. And if I'm working on a document like this, I'm always very comfortable to have a table go full width and stick out a bit beyond the measure, so you make the most of your page there.
Simon, we've got a question from Tabitha, who is, and I just want to ask this in while you're talking about tables. They've asked, how do you identify where and what data should be used in infographics? So at what time do you think a table is necessary or a visual? What kind of things do you want to use those to show most commonly?
Well, I think tables, if you've got anything that's a bit indigestible, that's naturally going to fall into something that you can represent a flow. So for example, you might have issue details takeaways. It's a great way to get a lot of information in quite a compact way. Also, if you put text into tables, you don't have to do any of that joining together of ideas that you'd have to do if you put it in narrative text. So it can be a great shortcut. And I think you want to try and make sure that any visual that you add in is kind of doing a job, that it's not kind of gratuitous. When we do research with people around the kind of things they find annoying in documents, irrelevant data or irrelevant charts is the kind of thing that drives people nuts. That they've been staring at a table for 10 minutes trying to figure out what it is, and they eventually realize that actually it's not really delivering any benefit at all. So that's a quick thought on tables. Okay, and then I think the final element I had to show you here was zooming in onto, let me just double check what's happening here on my slides. Hold on a second, team. Okay. See, I wanted to show you one other thought here, which is that the idea of sometimes it can be useful to add what I would call an eyebrow. So you see at the top of the page here, that big headline says adopting the master plan will deliver 10 million of funding for Greentown Aerodrome. So it's some sort of planning context going on here. And in the header at the top of the page, I don't know if you can see that, it says Greentown Council, then planning meeting. So what we could do is use what I would call an eyebrow, where we put the planning meeting kind of identifier immediately above that headline. And in the olden days, this would be called an eyebrow or a skyline, very poetic names.
Very visual.
And that's pretty much the end of my kind of process, if you like. So lovely. That's taking us through to the end of that kind of transformation.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, what we'll do now is we'll get into some more, some general questions. And those of you who are watching from wherever you are, please feel free to click the Q&A button down the bottom there and pop in any questions that you would like Simon's thoughts on. Now, what you've shown us, you've gone through in very quickly, and it's an amazing transformation. We have a question here. If you only had 10 minutes to tidy up a badly formatted document, what would you spend your time doing?
I think probably what I would do is I would think a lot about the opening section, the executive summary. I would try and make sure that that was working clearly, and to do that, I would do the kind of things we've got here. So we've got a big clear heading, what I would call a headline, that very, very top level message headline, and then to think about, what are the key thoughts I want in the executive summary, and to make sure they're in your statement headings. Beyond that, I would pick my sort of top 2 or 3 levels of styles, set them, and just go through and apply them. So, and also one other thing is page breaks. Look at your page breaks. Make sure that they're falling in good places. Don't leave yourself with a heading right at the bottom of a page. Make sure you kick that over to the next page, that kind of thing.
Lovely. Okay, Rebecca has asked, as a plain language writer, what can we do to make the designer's job easier when the document eventually goes off to them?
I think it would actually be talking to them. So I think actually take the time to, maybe somehow mark up a copy and say, look, this is the thing I really want the reader to notice. These are the most important things I want them to take away from the document. And these are the kind of key breaks in the narrative, if you like. So this is where I've set my scene. This is where my big idea is. This is where the detail comes. So help the designer understand how you've thought through splitting the document and what your key messages are.
Lovely. Oh, some gold in here, Simon. Now, what I'll get you to do is unshare your screen so we can see your full wonderful face in all of its glory. You are. Okay, our next question is from Karen. I hope I've said that right. There seems to be a lot more use of icons in everyday communications. Is there a role for icons in documents?
I have to be so careful here, don't I?
Yes, you do. Think of all purposes, Simon.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I think I think I don't think it's controversial to say, I think icons, we've almost reached peak icon. But I think we can overuse them. So you very often look at a document where it's got 5 or 6 different icons in it, and you stare at them and you think, what's that? I can't tell. So I think I would be cautious about, don't overuse them for impact. It's like anything. If you use it a lot, it loses its effect. So I would think about where you're using some icons. Do you think about maybe you trim the number of icons you have, and some of them you make you just use words and headings, perhaps. That's my most diplomatic answer.
Lovely. Thank you, Simon. Very good. Okay. Do you have any advice for people who are choosing fonts or styles of text or size or anything like that? Any specific or general advice there?
I think my main advice would be go with a system font. Go with a font that's shipped with Windows 10, because if you choose a non-standard font, there's a risk that Windows and Word are going to make some very strange substitutions that you weren't expecting. So I would always stay with the system. Absolutely, I would stay with the system font. Personally, I think Georgia, which is a system font, is rather wonderful. But the fonts quickly move into personal taste. Size-wise, I think take care that your text isn't too small, and also, and this is a heartfelt plea, keep your text in black, because there are too many documents that have grey text, and let me tell you that trying to read a printout of a document with grey text, it ain't easy.
And that comes back to one of those design principles, those CARP things, the contrast, isn't it? So black text on a white background is peak contrast.
Absolutely, yes. And one of the things as well that Thomas and I were chatting about as we prepped for this is that a bit of advice I would give people is that you may think that making your headings blue or red is going to make them more prominent, but try printing it out in black and white. Because what you'll find, for example, is a red headline will actually look grey, so the black headlines will have more punch in a black and white printout. So it's worth thinking to yourself, how will this work in black and white, the kind of the worst case scenario, if it's the kind of document people may print.
And on the subject of text, one thing that we see a lot of is people really wanting to make or to highlight a certain point by putting text in bold within a paragraph. Do you have any advice on using bold or italics or underlining, things to do or avoid?
Well, I think a couple of quick things. First of all, our general advice would be that within a text paragraph, try to keep away from formatting odd words within it. So a colleague of mine used to say that if you bolded a word, a keyword within a paragraph, she would call that very unkindly desperate bolding. So you'd realize that you'd failed in your writing layout, so you tried to bold odd words. These days, underlining, everyone expects it to be a link, so I would kind of keep away from that. Yeah, I think that's probably, I would tend to try and keep text clean, really. I think underlining's gone the way of the dodo, really, I think.
Museums. Okay. Thank you to Jenny. Jenny has a question here. If you have images, where is the best place to put them? On the right?
On the right or on the left? Well, there are different ways of thinking about this. One way is the idea of kind of the F pattern, or reading gravity, suggests that if you think of Western people read Western languages, we read them left to right. So you can argue it either way. You can say, well, if you put it on the left, then it's where my eye is going to alight. But equally, if you put it on the right, that's kind of a focus point as you move to the next line. So I think, and also not to sound evasive, but it kind of depends on what I call the visual weight of the image. So for example, if you have a cutout picture of a white napkin, hasn't got very much visual weight. But if you have something that's a squared up dark picture with a deep red flower in it, that's got a lot of visual weight. So I think you have to kind of look at your page a little bit and form a view.
Lovely. Okay. Now we have a question. For a document that is chock full of content, how do you keep the statement headings light? As in, you mentioned before that if you use something too much, it loses its effect. How many statement headings is too many? And if you've got lots of things to say, how do you balance that?
Right. Okay. So a couple of questions in there. I think one thing I'd think about is, roughly as a rule of thumb, I think I probably think, well, if I've got an A4 page and I'm around the 11, 12 point text mark, I'd probably think 4 to 5 statement headings on a page is a goodly quantity. I probably wouldn't want to go higher than that, I think. And if you've got lots of messages that you want to get across, I mean, I think about, do you need to change how you approach your page? Could you use a table, for example, where your left-hand column is your key message, and then your right-hand or your middle and right-hand column are elements of detail that relate to that key message. That can be a place where using icons can be quite effective.
Lovely. All right, well, we've got time for one more question, and Penny has one here. How would you approach designing a document that's as likely to be read on a phone as it is on a full screen or even printed out? That's a tricky medium to deal with. Yeah. Are there any general pieces of advice you can give there?
Well, I think what I would do is I would look at what do really good online news sources do, because those folks work very hard to make sure that it's going to be as good on your phone as it's going to be on the screen, and whether it's a part of one of multiple stories or a single story. So, for example, the ones that I look at the most often for that kind of inspiration would be, I'd look at The Guardian, the UK Guardian, I'd look at the New York Times, and I'd look at The Economist, and I'd look at how are they formatting text and pictures. And it's actually really fairly, once you get down to things that you read on phones, it's beautifully old-fashioned, because you've actually got a single column, and so it's words and pictures in a single column. It's actually quite deliciously straightforward.
Oh, back to cooking again.
Indeed.
I'm noticing a theme here. All right, well, that is our power half hour. So Simon, is there any final just general pieces of advice that you would give to people as a take-home message when they are laying out or formatting their documents?
I think, well, keep it simple. Have the right-hand margin wider than the left-hand margin. That actually adds a little bit of sophistication. Make sure that your headings clearly link to the text below them, so more space above and below your headings. And go and have a look at the greats. Have a look up Jan Tischold and folks like that, and we'll send you a link to those. Jan Tischold and Herbert Bayer, people like that. So we'll send you some links. So look backwards, not forwards, when it comes to layout of writing.
Lovely, very much. Well, our one final comment here, Una says, answer the phone, it sounds urgent. So thank you very much, Simon, for your time and for your expertise, and thank you all for joining us. Just a reminder, this Q&A is being hosted by Write Online, our online video and resource library. Go to write.co.nz if you're interested in signing up for a free trial or to have a go. And once again, thank you, Simon, for joining us, and all the best with your writing out there, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, folks.